Hi, I'm Nick Herriman and welcome to another in the series of 25 concepts in anthropology. In this series I try to explain what I think are the 25 top concepts in anthropology in less than 10 minutes each. And today I want to talk about rites of passage. Firstly I'm going to talk about the idea of transition and threshold. Then I'm going to compare an Anglo-Australian society with a Western Desert in Australia society. I'll then talk about the three stages of the rite of passage and a little bit about what I think constitutes a rite of passage and what does not. So let's get going. The most important thing about a rite of passage is it's a ritual threshold. It transits you. It transits you from one status in life to another status in life. Now, to think of an example, we could compare two societies. On the one hand, Anglo-Australian society, which I belong to. In our society, you just get older naturally. I missed out on my 18th birthday and 21st birthday parties because I was overseas. However, I'm still considered, for all intents and purposes, to be an adult in my society. Now, being a husband is something different. I'm a husband, but it doesn't matter how long I have lived with the woman who's now my wife, I do not become married to her until I have a special kind of rite of passage. Now, I want you to think about what that rite of passage would be called. What do we call that rite of passage that transforms someone from being unmarried to married? That transforms a maiden to being a wife and transforms a bachelor to being a husband. And that is the wedding. Wedding is a rite of passage that does that. Let's compare that now with one of the Western Desert societies. And we can take our pick. We have, for example, in Western Australia, where I'm from, Ngatatjara, Pitjantjatjara, Wiluna Mob, Jigalong Mob. Now in these societies, you can live with a woman and be, at least from a Western perspective, a husband. However, there's no rite of passage that transforms you like that. By contrast, it doesn't matter how long you live, you cannot be an adult until you've been through a rite of passage. And that's the difference between the two societies. In one society, the Anglo-Australian society, you can only become married through a rite of passage, and in the other society, you can only become old through a rite of passage, which is known as an initiation. Now, what's next? We've got to talk about the significance of rites of passage. Rites of passage occur internationally. As far as I know, there's not a society that doesn't have rite of passage. For some societies, it's to go from being unborn to born. In others, it's to go from being a boy to let's say, a teenager or a young adult. In other societies, it's to become an adult. In other societies, it's to become married. In other societies, it's to become an old person. And even in some societies, you cannot be dead until you've had the proper funeral rite of passage. Now, anthropologists have done great work on rites of passage, and there are two anthropologists in particular I'm thinking of. One is a guy with the surname Van Gennep. The other is an anthropologist named Turner. Victor Turner is his name. Now, they have done some fascinating works on rites of passage. What they've shown us is that in all these societies, that is all human societies, rites of passage have three stages. Now, some of them are more developed, some of them are less developed, but three stages we have nevertheless. They are separation, the liminal period, and reaggregation. So let's consider those periods in relation to a rite of passage that I'm more familiar with, and that is the wedding. Now, first of all, the separation. When you are separated, you're taken away from your family by other men, and also the groom's father and your own father for what's called a bucks night. Now, during a bucks night, all the men who are involved in this ritual take you on what's sort of macho or strength kind of tasks, if you like. So you'll do things like go fishing, even hunting, driving a car fast, that kind of stuff. So risky, sort of Anglo-Australian macho behaviour. There are other interesting things that go on too. Everything gets turned topsy-turvy or upside down. If you're a man, for example, you're dressed up as a woman. They'll dress you up in stockings and suspenders, etc. They might also, if you're normally clothed, they'll make you unclothed. They'll take your clothes off. If you're normally free, they will bind you. They'll tie you up to something. So your whole status changes. And accordingly, you also have a special name. And this is typical while you're going through a rite of passage, particularly during this liminal period, this second period of rite of passage, you will have a special name. So you'll be called a buck or a stag, for example, or a hen if it's for the women's party in an Anglo-Australian wedding. The third stage is the reaggregation, and this is the part of the wedding where you're brought back into the fold. And this is when you meet up with your wife, who's actually now still a bride. So you both have your special rite of passage names, if you like. And then you're married, and then you're reaggregated. And just like that, your transformation occurs. You are transited from one stage to another. You go from being a bachelor to a husband via buck. Or you go from being a maiden to a wife via hen. Okay, now I'll give you some links for some much more fascinating examples that come from different societies. The most famous one, probably in anthropology, is the Narvan Rite of Passage, which initiates young Iatmul, that's I-A-T-M-U-L, Iatmul boys into men. And at one stage in the ceremony, as made famous by the famous anthropologist Bateson, B-A-T-E-S-O-N, there's a point where older males wipe their buttocks against the leg of the initiate. And this is the most horrifically humiliating, shameful episode, but it also helps turn these boys into men. And one more example I'd like to talk about, which you might be more familiar with if you're a student watching this, is the examples of what Americans call hazing. So if you join a college on campus, often you're put through all kinds of tests. You have to drink a lot, you have to get put out in the cold, sometimes you're even beaten. And that's all part of transforming you from not being a member to being a member. So it's a transit in status to joining a special cult, if you like, which is the university college. Now, I think rite of passage is the most abused term outside of anthropology. People will talk about teenage years as a rite of passage. I think that's incorrect. I know some anthropologists will disagree with me, but for a rite of passage to be a rite of passage, you need this sudden transformation. There can be different elements of it, but it's got to be ritually and symbolically sudden. You go from being one thing to another. That's why I don't think a trip to Europe, for example, teenage years really count as a rite of passage, though there are clearly some elements of rites of passage in them. And one element that keeps on cropping up in rituals and other parts of life is the liminal period. Liminality is a big word in theory of the last 20 or 30 years. People see this kind of topsy-turvy, upside-downness in other parts of life. And there's no denying you can find that in other parts of life, but it's most pronounced in the second period of the rite of passage. So let's recap. As I said at the outset, a rite of passage is a transition ritual. It takes you from one status to another, and you can think of it as the threshold through which you have to pass and you can never come back. I compared Anglo-Australian concepts of aging and marriage, if you like, with the Western desert concept. I then talked about the three stages, which were 1, separation, 2, liminal, 3, reaggregation. Then I talked a little bit about what I thought was a rite of passage and what I thought was not. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you for more of my 25 concepts in anthropology.